Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry, and on today's show, I'm going to be explaining why the Steelers bringing back Aaron Rodgers in 2026 might be a better idea than you might think. Now, before we get into my reasonings why I would actually be okay with the Steelers bringing back Rodgers for another season to kick off the Mike McCarthy era here in Pittsburgh, let me know down there in the comments section, who do you want to be Pittsburgh's Week 1 starting quarterback in 2026? Do you want Rodgers to come back? Do you want Will Howard? Do you want to draft a quarterback? Do you want to sign or trade for a quarterback this offseason? Let me know your preference down there in the comments section. Now, Mike McCarthy's preference, he said in his introductory press conference yesterday, is that he definitely wants Aaron Rodgers to return as this team's starting quarterback for 2026. And there's been a lot of people on Pittsburgh radio and social media, et cetera, that have said, that's a ridiculous thing to say and all these different things. And, let's be real. Most fans of this football team that just watched this team, lose 30-6 in a playoff game to the Houston Texans at home, don't want to bring back the same quarterback that lost in that playoff scenario. And they don't want to bring back Aaron Rodgers, who will be 43 years of age next season, and they want to start fresh with a new quarterback and start the process of trying to find the next long-term answer at the quarterback position here in Pittsburgh. And I think that that's perfectly valid. But first, the thing that I will say is that the playoff game definitely left a bad taste in our mouths. Certainly with Aaron Rodgers, with losing the way that they did, the offense only scoring 6 points, not being able to move the football all that often. I think a lot of people associate that performance with Rodgers, and maybe they don't look at some of the other factors there, like the wide receiver room and how good that Texans defense was throughout the season. But then you can also take a look not only at that playoff performance, but Rodgers' numbers in general throughout the season. And among quarterbacks with at least 200 pass attempts this year, it's not like he lit the world on fire. Now, he was very respectable in a lot of areas. He protected the football pretty well, got the ball out fast, didn't take a ton of sacks, all those different things. But like the efficiency numbers, he was 24th in adjusted EPA per play and 35th in success rate, and 26th in yards per attempt. And I think a lot of people are looking at these numbers and saying, well, these numbers are not the numbers of a quarterback that can win a Super Bowl championship in the National Football League. And if Rodgers doesn't improve those numbers heading into his second year, I would agree with that. And I think a lot of people will also look another step backwards here over the last 3 seasons where Aaron Rodgers has been a starting quarterback. In 2022, his final season with the Green Bay Packers, he was 21st in EPA per play and success rate. Then his final season with the New York Jets in 2024, he was 19th in EPA per play and 24th in success rate. Then this year in Pittsburgh, he was 22nd in EPA per play and 28th in success rate. So I think people look at the recent history with Aaron Rodgers and they say this is not the kind of quarterback that can take this team to the next level. And because of that, we should be looking more towards a long-term option at the quarterback position. I think that's a very valid take to have. But here's what's interesting is that the players in the Steelers locker room seem to disagree with that. And these are the guys that are in the locker room with him every single day. They see him play. They know, and they know ball. They know that these are NFL players. These guys know what good quarterback play looks like. They know what good, and high-level football intelligence look like. They know what great arm talent looks like. And everybody inside that Steelers locker room not only praises the way Aaron Rodgers, leads the locker room and does all that stuff off the field, but also how he plays on the field. People talk about his arm talent and his high IQ and always getting the ball where it needs to go in the right spot. And according to Brooke Pryor from ESPN, this is a Steelers locker room that really wants Rodgers back in 2026. It's not just Mike McCarthy. Pryor said this in a report just a couple weeks ago. The Steelers players are more than open to Rodgers returning to Pittsburgh. They want the 4-time league MVP back and conveyed as such to various members of the Steelers organization during their exit meetings last week, according to sources. Almost all Steelers players praised Rodgers during their exit interviews, and most, if not all of them, want the veteran quarterback to return in 2026. His support among players was universal, and those around the organization pointed out how beloved and respected Rodgers was there. And that certainly doesn't sound like, a bunch of guys that think Rodgers sucks or can't play anymore, or is completely washed, or was holding the offense back this past season, like a lot of Steelers fans tend to think think that he did. And, the thing that strikes me about this in particular, guys, is that it wasn't just the Steelers this year. It was the Jets last year. Like, apparently it was the same deal where guys like Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams were really upset that the team moved on from Aaron Rodgers, especially in the fashion that they did. And they wanted Rodgers to return to the team in 2025. And, apparently expressed to Aaron Glenn himself their uncomfortability and their frustration with the decision to let him go. So, these players see Rodgers every single day, and, these guys know Rodgers more than, any of us in the media or, just in the general fan base. So if you're going to say that these players are wrong about their evaluation of Aaron Rodgers and them wanting Aaron Rodgers back, like, you have to be able to say at the same time that these players are dumb or that they don't know what they're talking about. And I just don't know if that's the realm that we want to get to here. And, I think, when we kind of peel back the layers and we take a look at the last 3 seasons that Aaron Rodgers has been an NFL starting quarterback, I think we can add some context that can, kind of provide why NFL players that play with him every day think that he's still a good quarterback, but the numbers haven't necessarily reflected that over the last several seasons. I'm going to break down some of that context here in just a second. But before we dive into Aaron Rodgers' last 3 seasons and why I think he could have his best season of his last maybe half decade here in Pittsburgh if he returns in 2026. But before we get into all that, let's have a word from our sponsor here at Prize Picks. And the big game in Santa Clara between the Seahawks and Patriots is almost here. And there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than with Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. And since the big game is right around the corner, that also means it's your last chance to get into the football action before next season. So close out the year right with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. With the new social feeds feature, you can share Prize Picks with your friends and copy lineups from winners with a single click. Copy lineups you like or use them as inspiration for your own picks. And a new feature from Prize Picks that they now have that I love is early payouts. If your player gets out to a hot start, you now have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. So for the big game this year in Santa Clara, I'm going to take the more on passing touchdowns for my pick for league MVP, Drake May. I'm going to take the more on longest reception for Rashid Shaheed, the deep threat for the Seahawks. I'm going to take the more on receptions for Stephon Diggs. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. All right, so now let's take a look at the last 3 seasons that Rodgers has been a starting quarterback and kind of peel back some of these layers of why maybe the production wasn't as good as, Steelers fans would like it to be. Back in 2022, he broke his thumb on his throwing hand, and he played through it for the entire season, essentially. And, he also lost Davante Adams that offseason. Obviously his connection with Davante was legendary. And then who was his number 1 wide receiver that year? Oh yeah, it was Allen Lazard, the guy that would have been like the wide receiver 5 on Pittsburgh on the Steelers last year, even though like they had a bunch of wide receiver 4 types on this group last season. We'll get to the wide receiver room here in just a second. Believe that. But 2024 with the Jets, they were a fucking joke. Plain and simply, guys. I'm not even sure if Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen could have had success in that New York Jets offense. Now you might be saying, but Jack, they had Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson. It's like, sure, he had a legitimate wide receiver duo there in New York. But literally everything else from head coach to offensive coordinator to offensive line to run game to defense to special teams was crumbling around him. And this is still a team game, guys. Like, you can't expect quarterbacks with a completely crumbling foundation around them to have success. It's just not a reasonable expectation. They fired Robert Saleh after 5 weeks, and after he left, the defense ranked 31st in the National Football League the rest of the way. They were a terrible defense down the stretch. Also, they were a terribly coordinated offense with Nate Hackett and Todd Downing and the offensive line. Constant misassignments, and they couldn't win their one-on-one matchups. Rodgers was always under pressure and had to get the ball out super quickly. Also, they had no run game whatsoever. They ranked 31st in rushing offense that year, despite having Breece Hall, who is a talented player. And then I think they were 31st in made field goal percentage as well. So he had nothing around him other than those 2 wide receivers. And, as much as wide receiver, help is important for quarterback play, there's other things that go into, making a quarterback successful as well. And the New York Jets in 2024 just did not provide that for Aaron Rodgers. Not to mention, like, he dealt with a lot of injuries that year as well, including a partially torn hamstring that once again he played with, and then he still had all that crap going on around him. So I just don't see how anyone had the expectation that Rodgers was going to be a high-level producer at the position that year. And then when we shift our focus to 2025, his first year here with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and maybe his only season with the Steelers, something that not a lot of people mention with this discussion is that the Steelers only had one legitimate starting wide receiver on their roster the entire season, and frankly, no wide receivers that could consistently create separation versus the man coverage that pretty much every single defense that played the Steelers played, because they didn't have anybody that could separate, so they could just sit in man all day, and, Rodgers wouldn't have any open opportunities down the field to throw the football and use his legendary arm talent. It also didn't help that Arthur Smith prioritized playing Jonnu Smith, of all people, over Pat Freiermuth, and Freiermuth was the number 2 best downfield threat the Steelers had on the team last year, period. And he wasn't playing enough, and he wasn't prioritized in the offense. So, when people talk about Rodgers not, playing at a high enough level, it's like, well, he's a guy that's not very mobile anymore, and he's a pocket quarterback, so you need to provide him weapons that can get open down the field if you want a downfield passing game, and the Steelers just did not provide that for him. So I don't know why Rodgers gets all the blame for, the way that the offense was in 2025. And even then, man, despite all that at the wide receiver position and the stupidity of how they handled Jonnu Smith and how much they played him, Rodgers still played pretty decently. All right, he got the ball out really, really quickly. He was tops in the league among starters. And because of that, he didn't take a lot of bad sacks that led to, drive-killing opportunities. Also, he protected the football really, really well. He was top 10 in the league in turnover-worthy play percentage, okay? So he protected the football pretty well. So the negative plays were lower with the Pittsburgh Steelers offense this year than in previous seasons. Also, he was good in the red zone. When they had opportunities to score touchdowns in the red area, he was pretty darn efficient in that area, and because of that, they were able to get into the top 15 in points per game. Also, prioritize playmakers in space. Like, the Steelers, by far, led the league in yards after the catch, and especially when you don't have any element of a downfield passing game, or at least not anything consistent of a downfield passing game, to lead the league in yak is pretty impressive, because that means Rodgers is diagnosing the defense, and he's getting the ball out in space to the playmakers that he did have in Jalen Warren and Kenny Gainwell and Darnell Washington and DK Metcalf, guys that can really run after the catch. Rodgers actually played a pretty smart brand of football in 2025, and the results, are, league average, and I understand that these results here, are not good enough, but we have to put it in the context that we had a bottom 3 at best wide receiver room last year. We might have had the worst wide receiver room last year, and despite that, Aaron Rodgers got this offense to be a league average offense and the best offense we have had in Pittsburgh in years. Okay, this is really the first serviceable offense we have had in many seasons here in Pittsburgh, and we did it despite the fact that Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin did not give Aaron Rodgers enough talent to work with at the wide receiver position. And if anything, when you look at the situation, I think Rodgers maybe even elevated the Pittsburgh Steelers offense this year. And it's like, when you look at his numbers, they don't compare with some of these top offenses in the league and their quarterbacks. But also, those other quarterbacks have a lot more help and a lot more open receivers down the field than the Pittsburgh Steelers had in 2025. So listen, man, I think Pittsburgh needs to address the real problem here. Okay, Omar Khan needs to sit down this offseason, and we have to address the root issue that has not only plagued Aaron Rodgers this past season, but also Russell Wilson in 2024. The real problem on offense is we need more wide receiver talent, period. All right, it's been 2 straight years where the Steelers have had one good receiver. Okay, George Pickens, and over the last several years before this year, and then they swap him out for somebody that I would argue is a worse player in DK Metcalf, and then they surround that number 1 receiver with like wide receiver 4 types that defenses can very easily man up in man coverage. Okay, like the Steelers are just not built to win in a matchup league, and when you have a guy like Rodgers that doesn't move around and is a pocket quarterback, that is a recipe for mediocrity at best and disaster at worst. And if you guys think about it, if you fix this issue, if you go out and you get Aaron Rodgers 2 like legitimate separators at the wide receiver position, and you pair those 2 players with a legitimate deep threat and yak threat in DK Metcalf, I think you could be talking about, a really solid offense this year. If you were ranked 15th in points per game with the wide receiver room we had this year, you get 2 legitimate wide receivers this year, which, by the way, is very easily addressable in the offseason this year. Like, there's no excuse for Omar Khan to not be able to easily get 2 pretty good separators at the wide receiver position this year. Like, this could easily be a top 10 offense next year, especially because we're upgrading the offensive play caller in Mike McCarthy. All right, I think Aaron Rodgers, the players see how good of a player he still is, and that's the reason why they want him back, because they see the arm talent. They see the legendary football IQ, and they see that he's capable of playing a really smart brand of football, and I think if you can actually just get him some receivers that can beat man coverage down the field, you're going to see Aaron Rodgers have the best season that he's had in his career over the last half decade, probably since he won his last MVP trophy in 2021. I'm not saying he'd win MVP. I think it'd be his best season since then if he's brought back and he wants to come back and the Steelers do a good job building the wide receiver room, especially because Rodgers would come cheap. Aaron Rodgers what did he sign for? 12, 13 million this year? I think he would take an even lower contract figure next year if he decides to come back, especially if it means that extra cap space means they can go out and get a nice receiver in free agency and then maybe even trade up or stay put and draft a wide receiver early in the NFL draft. And if he can have a legitimate wide receiver trio along with the 2 tight ends we have here, Darnell Washington, Pat Freiermuth, really good tight end duo. If they bring back Kenny Gainwell and they pair him back up with Jaylen Warren, really good running back duo. I'm telling you, man, like this offense has a chance to take that next step to being a legitimately really good NFL offense under Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers in 2026. But you might be saying at home, but Jack, Rodgers can't move anymore. All right, like he can't scramble, he can't run, he can't do all these things. Well, the first thing that I'd say is I think Rodgers actually still has pretty quick feet in the pocket, and sometimes that elite level pocket presence still shows up. He can't run away from people anymore, and he's not going to really do anything as a rusher. But you know who else doesn't do any of that stuff? Matthew Stafford. Okay, Matthew Stafford, as an older, highly intelligent, great arm talent type of quarterback, he can't run away from people. He's not athletic enough to run the. I think Aaron Rodgers had more rushing yards than Stafford this year. But guess what? Stafford has a really good play caller in Sean McVay, and he's got 2 really high-end weapons to get open for him in Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. Like, if Aaron Rodgers played for the Los Angeles Rams this year, I'm not saying he would have done as good as Stafford, but that would still be, in my opinion, a high-level and high-functioning offense with the Rams, and they would have had similar offensive production this year. Okay, I do believe Stafford is better, but I don't think the gap between Matthew Stafford and Aaron Rodgers, given their physical and mental skill sets, is just this chasm that can't be fixed if the Steelers can get a couple of really good receiving weapons the way that Stafford has there at the Los Angeles Rams. So my take on the situation, guys, is if you get Aaron Rodgers, an adequate to great wide receiver trio this offseason, watch the Steelers offense open up, okay? Because it's like when you have Calvin Austin III, Roman Wilson, Adam Thielen, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and then the defense is double-teaming DK Metcalf, and they're playing man coverage all the time. What do you want Rodgers to do? Throw the ball to a covered receiver and put the ball in danger? Or would you rather him dump it off to Kenny Gainwell and dump it off to Darnell Washington and, kind of play that methodical brand of football and rely on yards after the catch? I think Rodgers played a very smart brand of football with Pittsburgh this year, and I think he elevated the offense given how bad this wide receiver room was. If you fix it, I think the Steelers could be potentially a top 10 offense in 2026. So pick your guys for me down there in the comment section. Which 2 wide receivers would you like the Pittsburgh Steelers to add this offseason? Let me know who would you like. Personally, I think it would be a good idea to get a guy in free agency and then get somebody early in the draft. So let me know what you guys would like to do at the wide receiver position down there in the comment section. Now, I'll also say here, guys, that even though I would be cool with Rodgers coming back for another season, I think this team could even get to a top 10 level if they fix the wide receiver position as well. I'm also open to other quarterback strategies. If you don't want to move forward with a short-term strategy option like Aaron Rodgers, I'm open to a guy like Malik Willis, who's still relatively young. He's got really good arm talent. It looks like he's really cleaned up his mental processing and footwork from his Liberty days with the Green Bay Packers. And, he's somebody that could be your long-term starting quarterback option. He wouldn't be that expensive either. I think it'd be somewhere between $20 to $30 million per season, depending on what his market looks like. You don't have to commit to him that long-term, probably a 2-year deal. And he could be your long-term option versus Rodgers, who would probably just be coming back for one more season. But with that said, like, people talk about bringing back Aaron Rodgers like it's like the worst possible plan the Steelers could do, and there's like no chance that the offense could be any better in 2026 with him returning in year 2. And I just don't think that's the case at all. With an upgraded offensive play caller, if you upgrade the wide receiver room, you have a year of chemistry with the guys that are already in the building. Like, I really do believe that Aaron Rodgers could take that next step here in Pittsburgh in 2026 if he decides to come back. And I think whether we like it or not here in Pittsburgh, guys, I know a lot of people want to start a rebuild and tear it down and start losing games so we can get a top 10 pick to take a quarterback, but like it or not, that's not what this team is ever going to do. They're never ever going to try and lose, and they are going to try and put themselves in a position to try and win a championship every single year. They're not going to accomplish that goal every year, obviously, and they haven't frankly come super close to that goal over the last decade. But what's really sad about the current state of the Pittsburgh Steelers, in my opinion, guys, is that we as Steelers fans are so frustrated with the lack of playoff success over the last decade here in Pittsburgh that we now get angry when the team says they want to win games. Like the fan base is so fed up with the current, 10-7 losing the first round of the playoffs, standard here in Pittsburgh that they want to lose games now. And that's just not where you want to be as a fan base, as a franchise. And, you got to do whatever you can to try and get to the next level here with Mike McCarthy as your head coach. And at least for the short-term future, guys, I think Rodgers is the Steelers' best shot to get there. Because even if you bring in a Malik Willis, he's never been to the playoffs, and first-time playoff quarterbacks usually don't have a lot of success. Rodgers has more playoff experience than any other quarterback in the National Football League. He's got experience playing in the playoffs with this group. He just won a division championship with this group as well. And if you fix that wide receiver position like we talked about, I think it's reasonable to expect this team can go from top 15 in scoring offense to top 10 in scoring offense in just one season with the same quarterback. And by the way, if you go with Rodgers next year, that doesn't mean that you completely forget about the future or you don't try and develop future quarterback options. I mean, Mike McCarthy is known as one of the greatest teachers of QB fundamentals ever in NFL history. All right, just ask Aaron Rodgers, who developed from, a super, kind of clunky mechanical quarterback at Cal to one of the smoothest throwers of the football in NFL history with the Green Bay Packers going through McCarthy's QB school. If Howard can, pick up some of those tendencies, really clean up the footwork, clean up the throwing mechanics, kind of, get better consistency on his football, learns how to mentally process a defense at an NFL level, who knows? Will Howard as a 6th-round pick might have a chance to be this team's next franchise quarterback. It's not a sure thing, but that doesn't mean that if Rodgers comes back, you're completely abandoning the future of this franchise when it comes to the quarterback position. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comment section. Would you be okay with Aaron Rodgers returning for another season? Have I convinced you that another season with Aaron Rodgers might not be the worst idea in the world for the black and gold? Give me a yes or no down there in the comment section. I know today was a little bit of a longer video, guys. I appreciate you sticking with me here as I laid out my case here. Personally, I'd be cool with Aaron Rodgers returning, and whether or not you agree with me on that or not, I appreciate your guys' support. Make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Till next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.